Are you ready to unlock hidden savings within your organization's Microsoft 365 subscriptions? Introducing Tenant Detective, an application designed to analyze your Microsoft 365 usage data and uncover cost-saving opportunities without impacting your users. Picture this: your organization invests in Microsoft 365 subscriptions, but are you truly maximizing its value? With Tenant Detective's proprietary set of algorithms, you can now gain unprecedented insights into your Microsoft 365 usage. Imagine receiving a detailed usage analytics report tailored specifically to your organization. Discover how much you can save by eliminating unused licenses and rationalizing subscriptions for over-licensed users. With Tenant Detective, you can rest assured knowing that your organization's Microsoft 365 investment is being put to its best use. Say goodbye to overspending on licenses that sit idle and hello to a more cost-efficient future. Visit tenantdetective.plow.net today to start optimizing your subscriptions.
Hey, Cut the Shit listeners. You can find every episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Go check us out.
Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the impact of the IT industry, both the good and the bad. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Bryan Link, COO here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions, and with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face dealing with IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started.
Ryan Law, welcome to Cut the Shit. How you doing today?
Great, Bryan Link.
I feel a little weird to be here, not with the three amigos, just me and you.
It does feel a little weird.
You know, I did this with Cameron, I don't know, a little while back, and it was the same thing. It was kind of weird. Like, it felt oddly formal.
I don't want it to feel formal. That's why I wore the Plow t-shirt.
You got a t-shirt on, so there is that.
Yeah,
and
that goes
I
formal.
mean,
I can throw the hood up like Eminem if I need to as well.
We've been hanging out long enough that the idea of being formal, just me and you, doesn't really square.
If this gets formal,
nevertheless,
it's weird. I'm leaving.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some good stuff.
Yeah.
So with that, let's get into it. I do want to spend some time talking about kind of the history and evolution of sales and the sales profession. Obviously specific to technology. I think the conversation will probably generalize beyond that, but for the purposes of who we are and what we do and the folks that are listening to this podcast, that makes the most sense. And that whole thing has changed, it feels like to me, in such a radical way over the past 20 years that I couldn't really think of anybody better to talk about it than you, since you've been on the front lines really since the 90s to today, right? I mean, I know we got people here that weren't even born in the 90s. So
the 90s.
You know, it's kind of crazy. But I felt like, you know, kind of taking that view would be interesting. So I'll try to ask some questions. We'll sort of step back in time and kind of try to work our way forward and see, again, and try to do a couple of things. Educate a little bit on sort of from people who have never been on the sales side. They've only been on the receiving side, right? Or maybe even just been in an admin kind of role and never even really thought much about it. And then also, I think, maybe conceptualize some of it about what's actually happening. I mean, what's happened with technology and what has it done to what sales maybe used to be? What is it now? What's the same and what's different? Because I think it'll help people maybe be better buyers too. Because I think that's a really important process for everybody to go through is if you're, salespeople get up every day and try to think about how do I do a better job at selling. Most other people don't get up every day and think, how do I be a better buyer?
Buy better?
But I actually think it's something you should think about. And
exercise.
I want to challenge you on that a little bit, having gone from being in a sales role in a large company where you didn't buy much to starting your own business. And now you're in the buying business in addition to the selling business. So you kind of sit on both sides of the table. So with that, let's kind of get into it. To help us get started, I mean, audience knows who you are, right? You're the president of Plow, but give us kind of a quick thumbnail sketch of your background and sort of before you got to Plow, sort of what your career looked like.
Yeah, so right out of school, it was, have no idea what I wanted to do. I thought I was going to play baseball forever and ever and ever.
Right.
So when that ended, I took a job with an automotive finance company through a friend of a friend, actually baseball friend, teammate, and did that for about 4 years. Moved to Fort Lauderdale for about a year of that, and decided that I was ready to be home. And that's how I got introduced into really sales and technical telecom sales at that point in time.
Right.
A lot more color to that that's unimportant. But yeah, so I started with a company called Teligent. I was with them for a year. They were selling, I didn't even know what dial tone was really. I just know it made that noise. Emily does not know what dial tone is.
No, she does not.
And I forget that they don't see her.
She's seen a landline on TV.
Yeah, that's it. Little phone booth, right. Superman changes, whatever. We were actually trying to position this as LMDS line of sight, so it was microwave-based technology. So people already were having a really hard time about the concept about leaving legacy Bell South for anyone, much less a company that was going to try to sell like aerial fiber that doesn't exist.
It sounded like Jetsons or something.
Yeah. Technically, it did go back to World War II, so it was a proven technology. Nobody knew about it.
I didn't say it was that. I said people didn't know what it was.
But that's how everybody thought about it. It was like, what are you trying to sell me? Sell me is the key there.
Yes.
That led to a change. I stayed in the space. That decision was a means to an end to get home. The next decision was more, okay, I think that I can do this. I met some people that were already doing it. And then 12 years later, I guess that was the entire time, 12 years at Nextlink/XO. That is how I ended up meeting Cameron through that process. And we started casually talking about, something different that we could do. We were both kind of burned in what we were doing at that point in time. And that's how Plow reared its head.
Okay. So talk a little bit about the roles you had and what was your job as it relates to selling?
So first it was sales. It was just sales.
Selling what and to whom?
Yeah, selling dial tone, which is hard for anybody to imagine or explain. But it was
everybody had phones already, but
local long distance.
Who you bought it from?
Services.
You didn't have it wasn't tied to the phone. You could buy it from whomever, right?
So you had a divestiture of AT&T in '82 that opened up the world for long distance choices. Then you had another one in the in the local exchange carrier space, which again broke up AT&T, Bell South, all those guys, all what they call the regional Bell operating companies.
Yep.
And that fed, the competitive local exchange carrier business. So everybody that could think of something like this and go get some money from somebody that wanted to invest in it started selling competitive dial tone, long distance bundles, and then the internet came, to fruition, and it was time to start grabbing internet. Everybody started trying to bundle that as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And just for context, because again, a lot of people who would listen to this podcast would remember dial tone, right? A lot of them maybe wouldn't. But if they didn't buy it, they may not have any idea how much the stuff costs back in the day.
Yeah.
Provide some context on how much it cost back in the day for this kind of stuff.
So where they killed you is in what they call rollover hunt group lines, and then like dedicated circuits, like dedicated T1s that became PRIs with the software interface.
Yep.
Those things were running. I think PRIs were a couple $1,000s a month. I don't know what they are today because we deal with hosted voice. I think they'd probably be $300.
Right.
Internet, the very first internet circuit I ever sold was a single T1, so 1.5 meg, for $4,500. And they were so fired up to be getting it. Like they were giddy. They were so ready to spend $4,500. You think about the day in context, it's like, what? People were spending 10 gig circuits for less than that in present state.
Yeah,
way
for
less,
sure.
a lot of times.
For sure.
So yeah, so it was the race to who could, Wall Street was obviously heavily involved because it was all investor backed. Everybody was doing IPOs.
Yep.
But it wasn't even about, looking back, it wasn't even about revenue sold. It was about widgets, right? It was about how many lines could you report to the street that you were selling. And that's how the stocks grew.
And so my assumption is that drove the sales approach all the way down the line.
Yeah.
Right.
So going back to something that you asked, back to the price. So the other place for the smaller, medium-sized shops that weren't buying PRIs and T1s, that was mainly a phone system thing, right? It was like, my phone system capable of handling that, or do I want to go buy this brand new phone system in order to be able to get the PRI functionality, software functionality? So where the companies like XO There were so many at that point in time. You had Windstream. Can't a ton of them. It was on the rollover line. So if I remember right, the Bell operating companies, I think they charged like $29.78 a line. So if you wanted your first line to roll all the way down 10 lines, right, and be able to, before somebody got it busy, you paid that $29.78 on
for every
10 instances.
Right.
And we'd come in and it was a made up charge. Like it was a complete gravy charge. And that's what really ended up happening. The exposure to the Bells on the stuff that you didn't really need to charge for, where they were making a mint because it all existed.
Right. So in those early days, what was your job like? Your job was to sell telecom services to businesses.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody can write that on a piece of paper.
Sucks.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
What did you do?
To me, it really looking back, it was a game of activity first and foremost as the role of the seller. If you could fog a mirror, we used to talk all the time. I mean, you could stick a contract on a pouch of a dog and send it in front of enough people, and they'd look at it at some point and go, wow, I can pay this versus this. Here, I'll sign the contract. So really, early on, it was a game of activity. It was like, if you want to get after it, you can make as much money as they can pay you, right? Because it's just a matter of sitting down with people. But you were really selling on price, right? You were selling on, to me, selling's always about a combination of product, support, and price, right? It's the best combination of those three things. You were getting in the door by saying, we're saving people roughly 35% based on how many lines they have, how many are in rollover, or if they're leveraging ISD and PRI technology.
Right.
And so it was a loss leader to get in the door. It was still challenging. I think we face some of this stuff still today. It was still challenging proving that people were freaked out. I mean, their phone systems, their phones were their lifeline. Remember, we're not back doing a lot of email and things like that at this point.
It's how you talk to customers.
90s.
This is
it's just
that or fax, right? Those were your ways.
Which is basically phone, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
I mean, your business depended on that phone ringing or you being able to make an outbound call, depending on what kind of business you had.
Yeah.
So that's obviously very different, today. But it was an activity game. It was just getting out in front of people and talking to people. That part of it's what's not changed. It's the type of activity that's changed.
Yeah, I was saying,
today.
it's how do you get to talk to people?
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, as
it's
we
all
know,
about getting in front of somebody that can say yes. It always has been. That's the harder part today than it was then.
Right. We'll get to that, obviously. Yeah. As you think about that, so drawing on that, which was a long time ago. It doesn't seem like a long time ago to us old guys, but it was.
Thanks.
And when you think about kind of as you in your early days and kind of coming along, because you moved from, sales, being kind of the front guy to management. I mean, you kind of worked your way through the whole process. From a best practices standpoint, what were some of the things that you were taught that, as you look back on those lessons, really still line up and apply today? Yeah. I mean, some of it might not, because some of it could, but that's probably more tactical than maybe strategic. So just wondering about kind of the best practices perspective.
Yeah. So I think that on the front end, from a lead gen perspective, it's still, like I just said a minute ago, it's still about activity, right? I think the things that we were a little bit different in how we actually embraced a very particular training process because the guy that was leading the Nashville location had met these guys and had really believed in having a true sales process. Most people were just going out there and just banging on doors and getting in front of enough people and, good things would happen. Our sales process was different in that it was still about getting in front of people, but at the end of the day, it came down to understanding, why somebody would want to do this outside of price. Because at the end of the day, it's not typically about just price. I mean, people are concerned about, is somebody going to answer the phone if our stuff breaks? Is there going to be a repair technician that's going to come out and going to service us? So from the very beginning, we believed in a methodology that took those three things into context, right? The combination of price, product, and support. And if you could get into the product conversation, meaning the reliability of what you were going to deliver, or if you could get into the support piece of the conversation, the price piece traditionally went away. Because if you think about it, everybody out there was selling on the same thing other than Ma Bell. Ma Bell was still selling, I'm Ma Bell, I'm the baddest. Like, if
Right.
you leave us, you're going to be screwed.
Right.
And everybody else was selling on price. So if you could differentiate at all by getting into what's important to them from a product perspective or what's important to them as it relates to support, then you can have a better conversation.
Right.
That's the same thing today, right? That is asking questions and listening, right? And then holding them accountable to the things they said. We're going to make them convinced that you were better than somebody else or somebody was better.
Right. Yeah, because the price, I mean, at the end of the day, if all you have is price,
Yeah.
then that's all you have.
You buy on price, you leave on price.
Yeah, until
Like,
somebody else can beat your price by a penny, then they'll buy from them.
especially when it's a penny on 100,000 minutes.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I use
Then
that as an extreme
No, I know.
example, but the point is the same, right?
Yeah.
If that's all you're selling on, there's nothing. You don't have a lot. There's not a lot of enduring value unless you can continue to drive
drop
your
it
price
down?
down.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, some people have been able to do that,
Yeah.
but that's not the norm, right?
Yeah. Agreed.
Particularly not in a resale business like that, where there was some reasons that you weren't going to be able to take the price down
Yeah.
on certain things.
Which is
right?
actually a funny part when you think about like the way that business started. Everybody was just reselling Ma Bell.
Yes, that's what I mean.
That's all it was.
Yeah.
I mean, some
It
companies
was theoretically all
made-
the same thing.
It really was. It was
Yeah.
the exact same thing. It was a paper, for the most part, it was a paper change.
Right.
Right. And then there was some accountability on how you service stuff. Like you had to have your own service people, but for
Right.
the most part, it was.
Well, but even then, like the service piece was only on certain parts
Yeah.
of it, right? Because you were reselling lines that you didn't own, right? Or you know what I mean? Space on
They still had
lines.
open tickets with, which still today.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that doesn't change.
They
the time.
still own that infrastructure at the
Yeah.
end of the day. So, as you think back on that too, so you mentioned a guy in Nashville with the sales process and some of
Yeah.
that. Who were some of your mentors or some of the sellers that you looked up to, and what was it about them that made you look up to them? What was it that I mean, if they come to mind now, there must be some reason for that.
Yeah.
And it may be some people that you like, I don't want to be like that guy. It could
Yeah.
be,
I think
you
it
could
was-
have negative mentors too.
I've always said that.
know.
From a mentor perspective, it wasn't necessarily sellers. It was, there were some leaders in my life that I think that, we all resonate with, and how they operated more so than sellers. What I did from a seller's perspective was just what you said. You come in, and to me, those first 30 days of kind of getting a feel for what you're doing, there's an education piece, there's a training piece, and then there's who are our clients? How can I name drop certain people? How can I chase, how can I turn that into vertical markets? It's a mapping game, right? Let's put the plan out. And then it was, hey, can I go hang out and ride with different people? Can I come in? I mean, let's go back to this. We were cold calling, make no bones about it.
Right.
Whether you were going out in public and knocking on a door or walking into a door with a receptionist sitting there, remind me to come back to that.
Yeah.
But the receptionist sitting there to keep you out, like that's what you're dealing with
Right.
at that point in time. Or just making random cold calls and asking for Bryan Link, and you've never met Bryan Link before, but he's the guy, right? Because you've done some research around that. So most people didn't do any of that. They would just go walk in, knock on doors. I mean, most people didn't want to work very hard at the end of the day, and still don't. But what I did is I would ask people that I thought sounded good internally if I could just go on an appointment with them, right? Remember, these aren't Teams meetings. You're going out in person
Right.
and you're meeting, and sometimes you get stood up. A lot of times you got stood up, as a matter of fact. But I would just go because I wanted to hear how they ran their sales process. I wanted to hear how they cold called. I wanted to hear the kinds of things they said. I wanted to hear what they did, when they sent an email and what that looked like. And a lot of that was, picking things that you liked and picking things that you disliked to determine kind of who you were.
Right. What fits for you.
Yeah, because
right?
There wasn't like a ton of this training that was taking place. Everybody was just it was just, again, I looked at it as an activity perspective. I met with, 10 people as a part of my interview process as a team, and they shared the kind of money they were making. And I asked them some inquisitive questions about like, how do they do it and this and that. And I was like, well, shit, if you guys are making that kind of money, I'm going to crush you guys. And I don't mean that. But I knew I was going to work harder than them, right? At the end of the day, that's what was my takeaway. So I think it was a lot about forming what works for you, and some of that's trial and error, and then what doesn't. What's not your personality? I'll tell you what was not my personality. My personality was not walking into that office and that receptionist or secretary or whatever was looking at me and ask me who I was there to see, and me to chest up and go, I'm here to see Bob, the decision maker. and turn your back and walk away to basically signify, go get him.
And that was a technique.
That shit that was taught. That was taught. Some of the things I'm not going to share. But getting to somebody.
We'll say that for after hours.
Somebody that had the money, the authority, and the need. There were scripts that were just brutal. I couldn't do that.
Right.
I flipped that into, I learned a little bit over time, I flipped that into being very gracious of that person, walking in and just being nice like you're supposed to be as a good human at the end of the day. And the one thing I will say that I did is about 2 or 3 months into it, I had this idea of taking either flowers or candy to the one that I deemed as the best gatekeeper for the month. And I would present them with that award, and that 9 times out of 10 led into me getting to come spend time with Bryan or Susie or whoever the decision maker was.
You did a great job keeping me from talking about
you. Awesome. And then I'd go in and tell them, I say, she almost cost you all this money because she's so good. Like and now they just have about now the gatekeeper's email and the phone and a no soliciting sign on the front door.
You can't give it flowers.
You're not getting it. Yeah, it ain't working.
No,
it's not working.
It's not human.
So
as much what not to do as finding a match.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of that. It was like, proposal presentation, what does yours look like? Who's doing some good work there already? I mean, you're borrowing things internally and you're sharing things internally. My goal every day was to come in and learn something and to come in and teach something.
Right.
And then, that fast forwarded out of that job. The next job I had it was really the same job. But I was considered a mentor. We did like 3 or 4 of these mentors per office, and we had about 20 total reps. And what they did is they aligned you with somebody brand new, most cases younger, just, certainly less tenured, but most cases younger. And I remember them asking me to do this job, to bring, little Johnny in under my wing. And they're like, I'm like, well, and there was quota relief that came with that. So you got a little relief on what you had to sell each given month, and you could make more money faster as a part of it. So there's some selfish motivation with it as well. But, I like working with people. I like bringing somebody along that wants to get after it. And so I remember Jeff Lovejoy, who was my boss at the time, who is one of those people I would consider a mentor, plug to Jeff Lovejoy, who just wrote a book, by the way, called Commence, and just put it out for early graduates. Awesome dude. But, I remember him saying, just do what you do every day. And that was the first time it made me think like, what do I do every day?
Right.
Like, I'm not real sure what I do every day. I get to office earlier than everybody else. I have a plan. I start executing that plan. I work through, if there's not a reason to go to lunch, I'm not going to lunch. Like, you know what I mean? It was those kinds of things. It was those moments. It's like, all right, if Johnny will just come along and work fast, he'll do good.
Right.
So I did that for a few months. And are we ready to go there or not?
Yeah.
It's kind of progressing things.
Yeah, because we're moving from sort of your front line. Now we're talking career progression, which now is going to start you're starting to give you a different perspective on.
Yeah.
You're starting to think systematically right now. Because you got these mentors. I know next coming is management, so you got to think about. Now I got a group of people who I'm responsible for. So keep going.
Which was probably the next step was the most rewarding job, the hardest but most rewarding job I ever had. And that was, they had me go find 5 people. It was this philosophy around kind of a baseball farm league. We're going to have these senior tenured teams of 8 apiece. And then my job was to go find 4 or 5, it ended up being 5 in our case, and bringing them along and teaching them, everything from work ethic to sales process to product training to all those different things, and put them in a position to get picked by one of the senior teams
to be on one of those teams
when they had turnover, right? So that was going to be our turnover fulfillment plan. I was like, so what am I looking for? Like, what am I allowed to go get? And the answer was no telecom experience and no sales experience, right? So there's nothing we've got to re-break from them.
Right.
It's just teach them how to do what you guys are doing. Me, the mentors, the mentees at that point in time. We worked our ass off, but they were super motivated. For me, going back to the purpose, I guess, really of this is what did you have to do to get them where they could go be successful? And it was training, right? It was really understanding product, that we had, because it was starting to grow at that point in time. I think we'd become XO at that point, which means we had bought Concentric and brought those two organizations together, which was our ISP backbone. But it was teaching them product and services, teaching them sales process. Like really, that's really when I feel like I kind of grabbed and embraced the sales process, because now it wasn't just my life on the line. It was these five. Right. And we got into opportunities. We needed to go in and we needed to win them. We needed to learn how to qualify them or disqualify them really fast. So that job was kind of when that sales process really started to morph. And so it was activity. It was understand what we're taking to market, and it was understanding how to figure out how a buyer's going to buy, right? Ultimately, and then things just progress from there. Throughout. That's when the one I go back to and say, all right, that's kind of where the rubber met the road. Like when there were some aha moments, it was like, all right, we got to do it a certain way. If not, Johnny's not going to be successful. Bobby's not. Susie's not. And it's on me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's maybe a good time to shift. To sort of
shift.
Yeah. Shift. Shift. Yeah.
Shift.
Making sure we were clear there.
Shift.
Good time to shift to, so now you've progressed in your career. Now you're managing, right? You've got this process. You're working. All this is based on your own experience. At this time, I would imagine, if not initially coming not too far down the path, you started to notice some things shifting in terms of what it was like, what the process, how that process might work, and what you would need to do differently as new technology started to come into play. So, the obvious one first would be email, right? Initially, email was a nice thing to have, but it didn't replace the phone, right? It began to, though, right? And now, fast forward, right? We're now to the point where, I go days without having what I would call a traditional phone call. If I do have a traditional phone call, it's either with a family member, a friend, or if it's a business associate, they're close enough that they're almost like a friend.
Right.
Whereas that's the exact opposite of what your world was like
for sure
when you started, and even in the early days. So when did you start to notice things to shift, and how did you notice it? What was happening? Did you start to notice it because things started going wrong, or was it just because life's starting to get weird for me too? Like I'm having a harder time getting people on the phone, or whatever it might be. I'm just curious because I wasn't in that particular world at the time.
Yeah. So the way I'll answer that is it probably was more about changing for me, because you got to remember, with every step I took in the organization, I took a step further away from the customer. Right. So I took a step further away from the reps. I got pretty distant, towards, especially those last 4 or 5 years. So for me, it was the amount of email I was getting. It was the amount of conference calls. Everything was a massive conference call.
Right. Was that mostly internal?
That piece was I was internal and external.
Okay.
Even customer facing stuff, because I was dialing into calls where the customer might have been in Denver, Colorado, or somewhere not that I was at that point in time. Anywhere across the central region would probably.
So sometimes the geographic expansion had happened.
Yeah.
Right.
But it was the email load, I think, that took place as it related to everything. And I didn't realize that until I got out of it. So to answer your question, it probably, where you're fishing, it was probably 12 years ago when Cameron and I started this company and got back into being close to the customer again, which is the best thing there is to begin with. And I didn't realize that those last 4, 5, 6 years of doing what I was doing.
A lot had changed, and you were sort of insulated from it.
Yeah. And now, fast forward, that a lot had changed in that it's like, this is a different ballgame. Getting somebody brand new, on the phone, getting somebody brand new to respond to an email, people responded to my emails all the time. More times than not, they were internal, or it was a customer that was pissed off, and I was helping fix it. Yeah. Right. So they were super responsive.
You were in demand.
Yeah. So now all of a sudden it's like, nobody's responding to shit. Nobody's responding to anything.
Right.
It's like, wait a minute. Which, you and I we talk about this a lot because you're always talking about, Plug for Plow being relationship guys, and that is who we are at the end of the day. But it was out of necessity to some degree, because if there wasn't a relationship, there was nobody talking to us.
I had the exact same experience when I started Simplify. I was like, well, because one of the things you don't think about, like you were at XO, you spent your career working at companies that were pretty large, right? And maybe they didn't have brand recognition, but like you're also selling, it was very clear what it was that you were in kind of a pretty clearly defined space. Then you went to Plow, which who the fuck knew who knew what Plow was, right? And
nobody.
And you were selling initially it was fairly clear, but IT services is kind of like
super
can mean
broad.
anything. It means a lot of things to a lot of people, and it still is. Part of our challenge, right, is continuing to sort of say. Because I tell people all the time. I usually tell people I'm in IT services when I don't want to talk to them about it. Because they're like, oh, okay, because they don't even know.
Write it off.
They don't know what that means. That could mean software development. It could mean making computers at home. They don't know what it means. It could be anything. Us saying it means this, this, and this, and that's it, and boop, stop. But I was the same way. I only called people who already knew who I was. Yeah. Because it was the only way I could get anybody to talk to me. That's it. If I try to cold call, we're trying to sell software to banks. Like if I try to call Fred Jones, EVP at whatever rank, he was never going to call me back. Now I could leave him a voicemail. It wasn't like today where I couldn't even, finding a phone number for him would be basically probably impossible. Yeah. I'd have to figure out an angle to even get a phone number for him. And if I did, it wouldn't matter. He wouldn't call me back. He doesn't know me. Screening's even worse than it was then. But I get it. That's it.
You just nailed the biggest difference right there.
The screening,
the whole part of this. Yeah. I go back to thinking about ways you could improve back in the day if you really were hungry. You want to be the best you could be. I think back to little things like, excuse me, sending myself. We'll start with leaving myself a voicemail. Right, and listening to it later that evening and thinking, would you return that guy's phone call? And that led into sending myself emails and constantly trying to figure out because people would still respond. You just had to figure out how to catch them. It was simple things like, going into a building and writing down the 15 names that are on the marquee. Right? Let's think about that for a second. You write the 15 names down. You come back or you're driving by old dictaphone. Last thing, what pissed me off, nothing pissed me off more than driving by 2 or 3 places on my way to an appointment and then finding out and be like, oh, I'm going to call ABC Company and forgetting all about ABC Company at that point in time. And then 2 months later, find out one of my teammates, competitors got that. Yeah. So then I went to old school dictaphone just to grab that so I wouldn't miss it. But it was simple stuff like, what do you do with that? Well, you play it. And you pull out the yellow pages, because that's what we were working with. Yep. And you look them up, you get their number, and then the very next morning, that was my 20 calls. And for that morning, the first 20 calls were literally, I'm calling to find out who is the person, right? So whoever answers the phone, I'm just asking, who makes this decision? Yes. And it's Bob or it's Susie, right? Because it's always Bob or Susie.
And they would tell you.
Yeah. But I was never one to say, to call in and be like, I need to talk to the person that's the decision maker. Right. That was taught. There's a lot of people I listen to do that. And I'm like, there's no way in hell I'm ever going to do that. Right. So the next day now I get to call and ask for Bryan, right? With my sweet voice. Is Bryan available? And for whatever reason, a lot of times they patch me through to Bryan. Yep. And you get to
because they didn't know. It might have been something that Bryan needed. Right?
I asked
That's how that worked.
I asked the question at one point to several people, and they basically said, you just sounded like somebody that would be asking for him. You just sounded like one of his friends. Well, that worked out. But today, all right, now we've got all these tools. We can get names and numbers and all these different things at our fingertips with a keystroke. But guess what we can't get? Anybody to answer the damn phone. Anybody to respond to an email. You got all the information. The question is, how do you get them to even read or listen to anything you're doing? Right. And then it gets back to, I know it's we talk about here all the time, it gets back to how you leverage social media, it gets back to, building your referral network and all these different things that are very, very different. Yeah. Because back in the day, it was just a matter of, I'm telling you, activity one. And if you had any level of desire to be proficient in what it is that you did, then you could kick some butt.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if you could just pick up the phone and call, eventually someone would get on the other line and you could, try to schedule an appointment to go talk to them about it, right? And if you did that enough times, you'd get some sales.
We had,
right?
we had internal debates about, do you leave a voicemail or not? And I was always the opinion, if I'm going to dial the 7 numbers at that time, is that right? Yeah, 7 numbers. If I'm going to dial those numbers, I'm going to make sure they know that I dialed those numbers, right? And they're not going to know if they don't answer and I get a voicemail. And I can't tell you how much success I had when I'd left 4 or 5 voicemails, and this time is the time that you actually answer the phone for whatever reason. Remember, we weren't dealing with caller ID, hiding, any of that stuff. You answered the phone because you didn't know who might be calling you.
Phone on your desk.
And next thing you know, it's me.
Could be your wife. It could be your best customer.
Surprise!
It could be Bryan Law trying to sell you Telecom, right? I mean, you didn't know.
And it was, again, it's just getting that at bat.
Yeah.
The at bats were easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've never been a professional salesperson, but I've done a lot of selling in my life, as has everybody, right? I mean, people who say they haven't, that's not true. Everybody sells.
You're always selling.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the biggest frustration when I was a parent, and I can remember telling my wife this. I said, this was when I was at Simplify, and we were desperate to try to get more clients. I felt like all I did all day was try to talk to people about buying.
That's what you did.
And then I went home and, would try to have to convince my kid to eat dinner. And I told him, I was like, I am tired of, I'm not going to sell to my damn kids. And she would say, you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Like, what else are we going to do? And I realized at that point, like, everything is selling, whether you like it or not. I mean, you can either just you can deal with it. You can pretend it's not the truth, or deal with it. But so I did read some,
sales books,
sales stuff. What most of it was, I thought, kind of hokey and whatever. But trying to think about it systematically made sense to me. And the one thing I remember most out of it was, if you can figure out a way to help people buy as opposed to sell, you'll be way more successful.
For sure.
And that's an obvious. And again, so I'm using this as a very long, not very good transition towards you becoming a buyer later in your career as you moved into an ownership role at Plow, and so being sitting on both sides of the table depending on what you're up to.
Yeah.
But for me, and I didn't do that till late in my career either, where I was a buyer, and then I did it for a while at a company where people did actually want to sell me something. I mean, when I was at Simplify, we didn't have any money, so nobody wanted to sell us anything because we couldn't afford to buy anything.
Right. You wanted to buy some stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I would have loved to buy some stuff. I had no money. But thinking about that, the idea of selling as helping people buy, transition. So you most of what you've talked about was about trying to get an at bat to be able to then be in a position to help somebody buy, right? Today, with all the gatekeeping and all the difficulties in getting at bats to get in front of someone to sort of do what I'd call a live sale, because that's what we're talking about, right? You're talking about wanting to talk to somebody mostly face to face or over the phone, right? That's what it was, and then being able to have a conversation and some back and forth and try to move the discussion forward. How do you translate that into today's world in the idea of what are the tools that you think make the most sense if you were to counsel someone who is getting into a sales role and trying to help people buy as opposed to sell them something? Because as far as I can tell, selling people stuff is almost impossible now because you can't get an at-bat to do so.
Well, I think to get the at-bat, you obviously have to be more creative. I think it comes down to, and we talk about this a lot here, you have to build a network that allows you to borrow somebody else's trust initially, right? So until that person trusts you, you got to align with somebody that they do trust already.
Right.
And, building, which means those people have to trust you. So it's kind of this whole, like, how do you ever get the chicken and the egg thing?
Yeah.
But if you're with an organization that's already trustworthy and at least a known entity, the referral network that you're working on will be open to that because they've got trust with the organization.
Right.
So if I can develop trust with Bob, and Bob's got a relationship with Susie, then I can meet with Susie based on Bob's recommendation.
Right.
And Susie's going to indirectly trust me, right? Until I either earn my own trust, we earn our own trust, or we do something
You disqualify
to screw that
yourself.
up.
Right.
Yeah. And or we don't want to do business with Susie.
Right.
Like that's nirvana would be those things.
Yes.
So that's why it's critical. I think that's why it's critical to have presence socially. I think that's why you still have to do stuff with your website. Cameron and I talked about these things back in the past. Like, we didn't have a lot of marketing, in my previous companies. He didn't have a lot of marketing either. And my pitch was always, but what if? What if we'd have been fine? We'd have done more.
Right.
And I think it's become critically important that you have face out there. Whether it's videos that you can fall back on, it's use cases, it's all those things. I think those things have become more important because if you don't have them, then there is no presence at all. And I think that if you get through Bob to get to Susie, and Susie can't go out there and verify anything on you at this point, then you're probably not going to get much of Bob's trust at that point in time.
Yeah, I can't decide if people trust less now than they used to, or it's just at the beginning. It's that you don't have to deal with as many people on the front end to sift through because of the tools themselves. I don't think people have changed. Really, I mean, I'm old enough to remember what it was like to be 25.
Yeah.
And I didn't walk around thinking everybody who was trying to sell something was trustworthy.
Yeah,
I don't
think that's it.
It was just like, to your point, if the phone rang on your desk, you picked it up and answered because you didn't know who it was.
Yeah, you had to get it.
If you'd gone in and sold, hey, I can screen all that so that you don't have to deal with it anymore, you'd have sold the shit out of that.
Yeah.
Because
you're right.
you'd have been like, I don't want to deal with all those damn
You never
calls.
have to do that again.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so
they would answer
happened.
emails, like just habitual. It was like, Bob's sending me something. It's compelling. It all goes back to timing. It all goes back to conditions, right? There got to be prevalent conditions that make you, especially today's buyer. I think today's buyer is like, I want to control the situation. We're not going to engage in having these conversations until I say we're going to engage because we don't need anything right now.
Right. The power, there has definitely been a power shift in the sales process. Some information asymmetries are gone, right? Buyers know and can get a lot more information than they used to, right? Communication asymmetries are gone, right? The things we just talked about, they actually flipped. The buyer has all of the power as far as the decision to communicate, right? They choose, they dictate when that happens, 100%. Now, they did later in the process too, but not at the beginning. Now they decide if they want to talk to you at all, right? And then, the other piece of that puzzle that I think is really important is not just information, but like know-how about like the ability to find out what else is out there in a macro sense. That didn't exist either.
No way.
There was no way to know.
Visibility.
Other than asking around.
You had to meet people.
That was all. There was no other way. You couldn't. Salespeople provided a very important function, which was they brought information to you. You don't need that. You don't need a sale. In fact, you're skeptical of a salesperson who brings you information.
Think about the car business.
Oh,
the change that took place there. You have everything at your fingertips, right?
Yeah, and if they didn't have, if it wasn't a closed distribution network, dealers wouldn't exist anymore.
No.
They just
agreed.
No offense to the car dealers out there, but they have a collusive relationship with the manufacturers, and so therefore you can't buy Fords new except at the dealership on the corner. If it weren't for Ford and the dealer forcing that to be the case, that would not happen.
Yeah.
No way, because nothing else looks like that anymore.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
Right.
It's just that game is it's completely flipped.
Yeah.
So.
Let me say one thing. You did mention something just a minute ago. We got away from it around helping people buy.
Yeah, I was going to go back to that.
Oh, you are?
Yeah,
there you go.
No, keep going.
Are we already ready?
Yeah, go. Let's go. That's where I wanted to go.
Let's pretend like we get in front of them, right? Because we can stay hung up on the whole lead gen thing all day long.
And actually, that's not. I don't really want to talk about that because I think it's an important function.
It's super real, though.
It's very real.
Back to helping buyers, though. I think that if anybody listens to this, they can maybe they take maybe I shouldn't just delete every email. Maybe I should answer the phone every now and then because it might be somebody supplying me with some information. You can always go get information, but if you don't know what the information is going to be, then you can't get it. Right? Does that make sense? It's kind of a weird way. If you don't know why I'm calling,
well, that's kind of where I wanted to go.
Yeah. So then you're dismissing me for a reason that you don't even have at this point in time. But helping people buy versus selling something, I think really comes down to the skill set of asking questions and listening. I really do. Because if you'll ask questions, you got to have the right questions to ask at the end of the day, or the beginning of the day, or the middle of the day, or whatever part of the day it is. But you got to listen, right? And you got to be able to take them through a process, I believe, that helps them on the front end really establish what their buying criteria is. I think about that with your question of how do you buy? Like, how do I buy?
Right.
Now with that role change, how do I buy? I'm not saying I'm a good seller, but good sellers are really bad buyers.
This is true.
And I've had a tendency to be a really bad buyer. Again, doesn't make me a good seller. It just the parallel may or may not be there. I don't know. But for me, like intense buying, like meaning something that matters, I've always gone to someone like you, who I trust already, who's gone through that experience, who knows somebody that I should talk to. Like that's always been, and it's probably the reason I approach customers the way I approach customers as well, because I don't want to go through mounds of information. Like, I would think about a TV purchase is something as simple as Best Buy. Like I get 3 lines into, backlit, front lit, this lit, whatever, and I'm like, I'm out.
Yeah.
Like what should I buy, right? And I don't want to overpay for something, but that's been my process. Here, when I've been the one that's been in the position to kind of make that decision, a lot of times it's not, I'm a part of the decision, right? I can bless something or I can, agree to something, but I'm not typically the one that's like in the weeds with that.
Right.
And it's because I'm relational and I'm trusting and I want somebody to share their experience with me and I want to align it with the experience that I want to have. And then I go, okay, I'm going to get that.
And I think that reflects what I would call buying philosophy. And I think it's important as I think about if people are listening to this podcast who are not sellers, they're people working technology or a business and they have responsibility for technology, right? Is what's your buying philosophy? And that may seem like this sort of, kind of loosey-goosey question. But I mean, like you just said, your buying philosophy reflects sort of the way you look at the world, right? And the way you want to do business. And now you might be couched in a company where you don't get to have a buying philosophy. Your company may already have a buying philosophy.
Yeah.
And if they do, you're going to have to roll with it because they're probably not going to ask you, right? And those vary wildly, right? You've got everyone knows the difference in the way a Walmart approaches vendor relationships versus the way a small consulting company might approach that, right? And that's not saying Walmart is wrong and the consulting company is right, unless your philosophy is more in line with this or this, right?
Yeah.
Now, part of the reason Walmart's philosophy is the way it is because of who they are and how big they are. There's circumstantial elements. Most of the people who we're talking to don't get to dictate this is what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and how much I'm going to pay for it. If you don't want to do it, I'll find somebody who will, right? A lot of people would like to have that situation, but that's not reality. And it's also not relationship based anyway, right? At least not out of the gate. That doesn't mean Walmart doesn't have great relationships with people. They do, but that part of it. But I do think we talked about information asymmetry, and I was curious, I want to get your thought on this. From back in the day, you had to talk to salespeople to get information. Now we flipped it the other side, which is there's so much information. You described it a little bit in the TV buying process, but I think we've sort of fallen victim to the idea that as buyers, we can be completely self-service because we've got all the information and therefore we can suss it all out.
Yeah.
We can figure out what's meaningful, what's not, sift it all, and figure out the right choice for us, right? We can make an optimized choice for us completely self-service. And the answer to that's probably true, but does anybody really want to spend the amount of time it takes to get there? Some do.
We got a couple that do.
Some do, right? Yeah. But most people don't.
Yeah,
most people want to, make some.
Help
they want to, compromise somewhere. They want it to be good enough, pretty close. But I don't want to spend I got a job. I'm the chief operating officer. I'm the whatever VP of IT. I don't want to spend 3 months trying to figure out, do a full deep dive on, server technology or whatever it is. Back to your point. So to me, it feels like that consultative piece has just grown over time in terms of what salespeople can do in terms of helping people buy. That gets into conflicts. It gets into all kinds of problems that salespeople have, right? If you only sell one thing, I mean, that's a challenge for you because you only sell one thing.
That's
right?
a real thing for the buyer too.
Yeah, and the buyer has to decide: am I willing to? Do I think this is either the best or the right solution for me? And you're probably not the seller. Some enlightened sellers may say this is probably not the right solution for you.
Yeah.
Most are not. Most are going to tell you, yeah, this is the right thing for you to buy.
Yeah.
Because it's in their interest. You know,
it's on their logo on their hat.
Yeah, it's that old saying about don't expect a man to be sane if his paycheck requires him to be insane or something like that. It's an old saying, but it's the kind of thing like incentives are powerful, right? And so that's always something for buyers to think about.
You can't be unbiased in that position, right?
No.
At the end of the day, you gotta move the product.
Yes.
That you've got to move.
Yes. And you have to. I think you have to sort of just put it out there and position it as best you can with an understanding of what else available. I mean, when I think about our world, we sell Microsoft 365 and Azure, and I mean, truthfully, for Microsoft 365, there just isn't any competition. So I mean, it frustrates me. I wish I had another alternative because they're hard to deal with in certain ways. It's a great product. It's not that, but like certain things about it that are very frustrating. But I don't ever get the sense from talking to people to be like, well, you're just trying to sell me Microsoft 365. I'd be like, I'll tell you the truth.
Have it.
If I had something else, I'd put it out here. I don't have anything else. That's a very rare situation.
That's a good point. I think that on the consultant side of things, or the consultative side of things, I should say, your job. I think the job now is the customer that wants all the information and is already gone through I can think of a couple of our customers right now that they're going to come to us when it's time to buy what they've decided to buy. Right. And the couple of the times that we've had the opportunity to get them earlier in the process, the conversation has changed to where it's, okay, you care about these things. Why?
Right.
Like, why have you been, because you read it and they're the only ones that have it? Like, are you going to use it? Like, it's those types of conversations.
Challenging some assumptions in that process.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
And then the art for the seller that only has that one widget, or that brand of widgets they have to move, is they're just going to ask you questions that your answers align with their answers, the answers that they want you to get to.
Yes.
And they're going to conveniently leave out things that don't work well with them. Right? So that's where, there is the knowledge is power to some degree, because you got to have, or you just work with a consultant that you trust and let them come in and take you through that whole process, right? And point out the things. Ask all the questions that need to be asked in order for you to establish your buying criteria and what's important to you really in those three areas, right? Again, and then handing you a scorecard that says, you did the math, man. Like, there's the data. Like, did anything change?
Right.
Is your data points?
We work through your assumptions. We rank those. This is what they are,
Yeah.
right? To try to sort of do that sort of matchmaking exercise.
And I think that's the blessing, of our company, is the ability to do that versus the blessing of, the past. You could look at the past and go, okay, everything was in this lane. Like, it was just easy. We stay in this lane. We get into some different lanes, but at the end of the day, we're also not boxed in to push something on you that's unnatural. And
I think in this sort of the power shift we've seen, right? It's harder to be a monoline. This is all, I only sell this thing, unless it's something pretty unique. I mean, the challenge or the goal there would be obviously to make sure that you're talking to, you would want to qualify better to make sure you don't waste people's time. If you're selling, don't sell baseball bats to people who play tennis. I mean, that's a stupid example, but you want to make sure you're talking to the people that pretty damn well. You're pretty damn sure that they don't have to buy what you're doing, but yours makes sense. You're not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, right? Because that's just a recipe for for frustration.
That's selling.
Yeah, that's selling, and even if you're successful, you're probably not successful long term, right?
Not.
I mean, unless you're one-off.
It comes back to get you.
Unless you're one-off transactional stuff, which again, when you think about what's happened in the world with the SaaSification of everything and moving to services, everything has gotten. There's more longer-term relationships now than there ever were. That may not mean the contracts are longer necessarily, but the shadow of the future in terms of the way you want to generate business and build value over time, the longer term is better, I think, because it forces sellers to not just sell stuff.
Yeah.
Because you can't win doing that. Like you cannot win long term doing that. Whereas once upon a time you could.
Yeah.
You can go in, information asymmetry, sell them X, write you a check or get a 5-year deal, get a big commission, and you're gone. And they're like, wait a minute, this is not what I need.
Right.
Well, in 5 years, we'll talk to you then.
Yeah.
Or you can buy out, and then we'll get another big check.
I got to sit in front of a lot of them.
Yeah, I bet you did.
At one point in time.
I bet you did. Well, let's wrap it up. I know you got to get back to it. As you kind of, again, you've seen a lot of changes in kind of this sort of world. And as you think about the sales experience writ large, and you look forward next 2-3 years, what excites you about that as you see, kind of from the selling and the buying perspective, trends or, opportunities that are exciting to you in terms of changes? Anything?
To me, it's the conquering of just getting, I'm overusing this term, but the conquering of the at-bat. Like the frustration is, in our current state, we know we can do great things for a lot of different companies, out there. And the frustration is around getting in front of them to have those conversations. I think that we run a good sales process. I think that we guide them well. It's just a matter of getting there. So something that would excite me is us to figure that out. Yeah. We can figure that out. I think that we can help a lot of people, and that would be super exciting.
Yeah. What scares you about that same process?
Oh my God! Same time? Not making any headway.
Right.
Not getting in front of that. Our customers today, are super relational. There's few that did not come from a pre-established relationship. I think we've gotten better. Turning some of those up, and a lot of that's coming back to the referral network that now trusts us because we're 12 plus years old, and it's like, okay, these guys, these people have been doing it pretty good for a while now, and we've passed the watermark, I think, on those things. But yeah, like if it just was like we could never get the next person to listen to us, I'm good with meeting with people and establishing that we're not the right fit one way or another. What sucks the worst is knowing that there's a game being played out there and decisions are being made and people are signing up, to spend money on it, and we're not invited.
Right.
And hell, we don't even know the game's being played. I've always hated that. That's always been one of my biggest fears.
Yeah. And I think it's a real fear. I think it's a real fear for any, particularly small to mid-sized businesses, right? Because, I think our marketing team has done just an amazing job of establishing a brand presence and, giving us at least the ability to be visible and to be noticed, right? And to have awareness. But it's not like Deloitte or whatever. Pick your big company that everybody knows who they are.
Kleenex.
Yeah, that doesn't mean it doesn't mean they win, but they don't have this problem. Like there's not the who are you? Like what? And to your point, the relationship piece. I think the reality is it will always be critical for us. I think the nature of what it looks like may change over time.
Yeah.
And it already has. You mentioned the referral network. You think about how many clients we have now of people who used to work for a client who left and went somewhere else and hired us.
Brought us along.
Right? They brought us. We didn't sell them.
Right.
They came to us.
Yeah.
Right? Because they had worked with us before.
Yeah.
That's a long game, right? Though, because not everybody's going to leave and go somewhere and be in a buying position.
Makes you feel good, though.
It does.
That's a testament to knowing
that's a great thing.
You're doing things right,
and
I trust you.
Despite the fact of your sort of negative approach or perspective on things. We have grown 20 to 30% a year over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, so we're doing something right there. But I know it feels like we could do more.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
And that's
that's
I know we could.
Yeah,
and
need the opportunity.
Trying to figure that out. I think it's the same challenge everybody's got. And I think at the flip side, I think there's plenty of people who are on the buying side who are like, I don't really know how to, I'd like to buy from some reputable companies, but I don't know how to find those people.
Yeah.
I think there's if people were honest, they would say that, like, how do I find
Yeah.
good people? And the answer would be the same way it used to be in a lot of ways, which is outside of the cold calls, it's I'm going to call people that I trust and ask them, hey, who are you using for this? Who have you had luck with? Which isn't let's go look at the full universe of options for cloud consulting and then narrow it down to the 3 best.
Right.
Because the options for cloud consulting are 4,532 companies. Like, nobody can pay any attention to all that.
Yeah.
So
That's up higher than I thought.
maybe it's 4,432.
It's a lot. That's
it is
for
a
sure.
lot. It is a lot. All right, B-Law, we'll wrap it right there and let you get back to work.
Yeah,
Thanks for
sounds
being
good.
on Cut the Shit, and make sure and tell Cameron how much fun it was for us to
will.
do this without him.
I will. It was way more fun without him. Thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would become a subscriber wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that would really help us out. Or you can just go old school and tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, and hell, anybody else who you think might want to hear something like this to listen in. If you're on social media, make sure to follow us on TikTok @CutTheShitPod, all one word, where we post lots of clips from the podcast. And last but not least, you can also watch the YouTube version of the show on our YouTube channel @Plow Networks. Until next time, take care and have a great day.